Elizabeth Monroe stared at the letter in her trembling hands. The black-edged paper, a stark reminder of all she had lost. Boston seemed a lifetime away now, its cobblestone streets and tea parlors replaced by the unforgiving landscape of the Arizona Territory. The wind howled outside, sending dust dancing across the parched yard of what was now her ranch, her burden. "Miss Monroe?" Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper who had come with the property, knocked softly at the door. "The supplies have arrived from town." Elizabeth straightened her spine, tucking away the grief that had become her constant companion since her father's passing 3 months prior. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I'll be out shortly." The mirror reflected a stranger, a woman whose porcelain complexion had already begun to freckle under the merciless southwestern sun, whose carefully arranged chestnut hair now fought against the dry heat. 23 years in Boston society had not prepared her for this exile. Outside, the wagon driver unloaded sacks of flour and beans, casting nervous glances toward the distant mountains. "Best hurry inside, Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Word is, the Apache's been spotted near Prescott." Elizabeth felt her jaw tighten. "Have there been more attacks?" "Stagecoach raided 2 days back. 3 dead." He lowered his voice. "Army's sending more men from Fort Whipple." The news settled like a stone in her stomach. Only a week after her arrival, she had witnessed the aftermath of an Apache raid on a neighboring homestead, the smoke visible for miles, the victims buried in shallow graves. That night, she had dreamed of painted faces and war cries, of flames consuming everything her father had built in this God-forsaken territory. "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Jenkins." She pressed a coin into his palm. "Will you be safe on the return journey?" "Got my rifle, Ma'am, and they don't usually come this close to town in daylight." "Usually." The word echoed in her mind as she watched him drive away, the wagon leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Her father's letter had painted Arizona as a land of opportunity, omitting the daily terror of life on the frontier. What would Edward Monroe think now, seeing his sheltered daughter standing on the porch of his ranch, squinting at the horizon for signs of danger? "Miss Elizabeth," Mrs. Abernathy called from inside, "Sheriff Callaway is coming up the drive." Elizabeth smoothed her skirts, grateful for the distraction. Sheriff Thomas Callaway had been her father's friend, and now served as executor of his will. His weekly visits brought news from town and a comforting connection to civilization. "Sheriff," she greeted him, noting the tension in his weathered face as he dismounted. "Is something wrong?" "Miss Monroe." He removed his hat, revealing hair streaked with gray. "I'm afraid I've come with troubling news. The Army caught an Apache scout watching your property yesterday." Her blood ran cold. "Watching me?" "Can't say for certain, but Colonel Richardson believes they may be planning something." He hesitated. "Have you reconsidered his offer of protection? The fort could spare a couple of men." "No." Her answer came swiftly, pride overriding fear. "I won't abandon my father's legacy at the first sign of trouble. This ranch is all I have left of him." The sheriff sighed, his expression softening. "Your father was a stubborn man too, must run in the family." He gestured toward the house. "At least let me check your defenses. And I insist you keep Jenkins' boy here overnight when he brings the next delivery. No woman should be alone out here with just a housekeeper." Elizabeth acquiesced, though the thought of strangers in her home brought little comfort. As they walked the perimeter of the property, Sheriff Callaway pointed out vulnerabilities, promising to send a carpenter to reinforce the windows and doors. "The problem is," he said, gazing toward the mountains, "we never know where they'll strike next. The Apache's move like ghosts." That evening after the sheriff departed, Elizabeth sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire. The beauty of it caught in her throat. How could a place so dangerous be so breathtaking? In the fading light, the saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, their silhouettes reminiscent of warriors standing watch. Movement on the ridge caught her eye, a lone figure on horseback, too distant to identify. Elizabeth reached for the rifle her father had insisted she learn to use, but by the time she had it in her hands, the rider had vanished. Had she imagined it? Or was the Apache scout returning, watching her even now? Sleep eluded her that night. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind became a potential threat. Near dawn, exhaustion finally claimed her, bringing dreams of a man with eyes like obsidian, watching her from the shadows. The town of Copper Springs existed for two reasons: the mine that gave it its name and the stagecoach route that connected it to civilization. Elizabeth guided her horse down the dusty main street, nodding politely to the few women who had ventured west with their husbands. Their curious glances followed her. The Boston heiress playing at Rancho was still a novelty. "Miss Monroe," called Mr. Hoffman from his general store. "Your order came in on yesterday's stage." Elizabeth dismounted, tying her horse to the hitching post. "Any mail for me, Mr. Hoffman?" "Just newspapers. 3 weeks old, but better than nothing, eh?" He chuckled, disappearing into the back room. The store smelled of coffee and leather, a comforting contrast to the dust outside. Elizabeth browsed the shelves while waiting, selecting a few extra items, a new notebook, some peppermint candies that reminded her of home. The door opened, bringing with it a blast of hot air and the sound of spurs. Elizabeth turned to see a tall man in an army uniform, his captain's bars glinting in the dim light. "Miss Monroe," he said, removing his hat to reveal blonde hair cropped close to his scalp. "Captain James Richardson. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Elizabeth offered a polite smile. "Colonel Richardson's son, I presume?" "The very same." His blue eyes assessed her with undisguised interest. "My father mentioned he'd spoken to you about protection for your ranch." "He did." She turned back to the shelf, selecting a tin of tea, and I declined. "With all due respect, ma'am, that was before we captured the Apache." The captain's voice lowered. "He was carrying this." Elizabeth looked down at the object in his outstretched hand. A hair comb she recognized immediately. She had lost it her first week at the ranch, assumed it had fallen somewhere in the yard. "Where did he get this?" she whispered, taking the comb with trembling fingers. "That's what I'd like to know." Captain Richardson's expression darkened. The savage wouldn't talk, even when questioned, firmly. The implication hung in the air between them. Elizabeth had heard rumors of the Army's methods of interrogation. What happened to him? "Escaped last night. Killed a guard." Richardson's jaw tightened. "We'll find him. We always do." Mr. Hoffman returned with her packages, eyeing the captain warily. "Everything all right here?" "Fine, thank you." Elizabeth gathered her purchases. "If you'll excuse me, Captain, I should return to the ranch before dark." Richardson followed her outside. "At least allow me to escort you home. These roads aren't safe." "Thank you, but I know the way." She mounted her horse with practiced ease, grateful for the riding lessons her father had insisted upon in Boston. "Good day, Captain." As she rode away, Elizabeth could feel his eyes on her back. The comb seemed to burn in her pocket, evidence that an Apache warrior had been close enough to take something of hers. Had he been in the house? The thought made her shudder. The sun was beginning its descent when she spotted the column of smoke. Heart pounding, she urged her horse forward, praying it wasn't coming from her ranch. Relief washed over her as the familiar roofline came into view, untouched. But the smoke rose from just beyond her property, where Old Man Wallace had built his cabin. Reason told her to ride home, to bar the doors, and wait for help. Instead, Elizabeth found herself turning toward the smoke, compelled by the same stubborn courage that had brought her west. The cabin was still standing, but flames consumed the small barn beside it. No sign of Wallace himself, until she spotted him, a crumpled form near the water trough. She dismounted, rushing to his side. Blood soaked his shirt, spreading from a wound in his chest. His eyes fluttered open at her touch, recognition dawning slowly. "Miss Monroe," he gasped. "Run." "They're still—" A war cry split the air, freezing Elizabeth in place. She turned slowly, terror closing her throat as she faced 3 mounted Apache warriors. Their faces were streaked with paint, their expressions impassive as they regarded her. One warrior dismounted, advancing toward her with deliberate steps. Tall and powerfully built, with a face like carved stone and eyes that seemed to see through her. Unlike the others, he wore no war paint, only a single eagle feather in his long black hair. Elizabeth reached for Wallace's rifle, but the warrior was faster. He knocked it away, towering over her with an unreadable expression. She waited for the killing blow, silently cursing her foolishness. Instead he spoke, not in his native tongue, but in perfect, accented English. "You should not be here, white woman." Elizabeth stared in disbelief. "You speak English? Better than you speak Apache." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There and gone in an instant. He glanced at Wallace, then back at her. This man is dead. Soon others will come. You should go. You killed him, she accused, anger replacing fear. Just like you killed those people on the stagecoach. Something flickered in the warrior's dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or was it pain? I have killed many men. This one was not by my hand. One of the other warriors called out something in Apache. The tall warrior responded sharply, never taking his eyes from Elizabeth's face. My brothers are not patient, he said. They say you have seen our faces. They say you must die. Elizabeth lifted her chin, determined not to show fear. Then why am I still breathing? The warrior studied her for a long moment as if memorizing her features. Because I have decided otherwise. He stepped back, gesturing toward her horse. Ride fast, white woman. Do not look back. She hesitated, unwilling to turn her back on him. Why would you spare me? Instead of answering, he reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew something that caught the fading sunlight, her silver hair comb. This belongs to you, he said, holding it out. I found it near the stream that borders your land. Elizabeth stared at the comb, then at the warrior's face. You're the one they captured, the scout. I am called Uncas. He placed the comb in her palm, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. Now go before I change my mind. She mounted quickly, gathering the reins with shaking hands. As she turned to ride away, his voice stopped her. Elizabeth Monroe. Her name on his lips sent a chill down her spine. The mountains have eyes, remember that. She dug her heels into her horse's flanks, galloping away from the burning cabin, from the enigmatic warrior who knew her name. Behind her, Wallace's home collapsed in flames, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. By the time she reached her ranch, night had fallen. Mrs. Abernathy fussed over her, demanding explanations for her disheveled state and tear-streaked face. Elizabeth provided only the barest details. Wallace's cabin burned, the old man dead. She said nothing of Uncas, nothing of the way his eyes had seemed to see into her soul, or how his touch, brief as it was, had left her skin tingling. Nothing of how he had spoken her name, as if he had been saying it for years. That night she dreamed of him again, the Apache warrior who had spared her life. In her dreams, he stood on the ridge overlooking her ranch, a silent guardian against the coming storm. The news of Wallace's death spread through Copper Springs like wildfire. By noon the following day, a posse had formed, led by Sheriff Callaway and Captain Richardson. They rode to Elizabeth's ranch, grim-faced men with vengeance in their eyes. "You're certain it was Apache's?" the sheriff asked as they sat in her parlor, his notebook open on his knee. "Yes." Elizabeth poured coffee with hands that refused to remain steady. "3 of them." Captain Richardson leaned forward. "Did you recognize any of them? Was one larger than the others, with an eagle feather?" The description of Uncas was so precise that Elizabeth nearly dropped the coffee pot. "Why do you ask?" "That would be Stonewolf," Richardson said, using the Apache name with undisguised contempt. "The savage who escaped our custody. Did you see him?" Elizabeth hesitated, the warrior's face vivid in her memory. Why had he spared her? What would happen to him if she confirmed his presence? "I don't recall," she said finally. "It happened so quickly." Richardson's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're very fortunate to be alive, Miss Monroe. The Apaches don't typically leave witnesses." "Perhaps they were interrupted," Sheriff Callaway suggested. "Or maybe they just wanted to send a message. Either way, you can't stay out here alone anymore. It's too dangerous." Elizabeth set down her cup. "This is my home now, Sheriff. I'm not abandoning it." "Then accept some protection," Richardson insisted. "I can station 2 men here." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I mean, thank you, but Mrs. Abernathy's son is arriving from Tucson tomorrow. He'll be staying with us." It was a lie, born of desperation and a strange reluctance to have Richardson's men watching her every move. The captain didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. After they departed, Elizabeth stood on the porch watching dust clouds from their horses dissipate in the distance. The weight of her deception sat heavy in her chest. Why had she protected Uncas? He was an Apache, one of the warriors who had terrorized settlers across the territory. And yet, he had returned her comb. He had spared her life when his companions wanted her dead. And there had been something in his eyes when she accused him of killing Wallace. A flicker of emotion, that didn't align with the bloodthirsty, savage Captain Richardson had described. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at her side. "I've prepared a bath, Miss Elizabeth. You look like you could use it." Elizabeth smiled gratefully. "You're a treasure, Mrs. Abernathy." In the privacy of her bedroom, she sank into the copper tub, letting the warm water wash away the dust and fear of the previous day. Her thoughts drifted to Uncas again, to his perfect English, his commanding presence. "I have decided otherwise," he had said, claiming her life as his to spare. The arrogance of it should have infuriated her, yet she found herself wondering what else he might claim as his. She submerged herself fully, hoping the water would cool the heat that had risen to her cheeks at such improper thoughts. Later, dressed in a simple cotton nightgown, Elizabeth sat at her vanity and reached for her hair comb. The silver caught the lamplight, reflecting tiny stars onto the wall. Uncas had carried this with him, had returned it when he could have kept it as a trophy. Why? A sudden noise from outside startled her, the sound of a horse approaching. Elizabeth moved to the window, parting the curtains cautiously. In the moonlight, she could make out a lone rider approaching the house at a gallop. Heart racing, she grabbed her father's pistol from the bedside drawer and hurried downstairs. Mrs. Abernathy was already at the door, peering through a crack. "It's Thomas Jenkins," the housekeeper whispered. "Mr. Jenkins' boy from town." Elizabeth lowered the pistol as Mrs. Abernathy opened the door. Thomas stumbled in, his face ashen beneath his freckles. "Miss Monroe," he gasped. "Pa sent me to warn you. There's a war party heading this way, at least 20 Braves according to the Army scout who just rode into town." "When?" Elizabeth's mouth went dry. "Tonight. They're coming from the north." Thomas glanced nervously out the window. "Pa says you should come to town right away. The sheriff's organizing men to defend the settlement." Elizabeth's mind raced. "Mrs. Abernathy, pack only what you need. Thomas, prepare the wagon." Within 20 minutes they were ready to depart. Elizabeth took one last look at the ranch house, at all her father had built, wondering if it would still be standing when she returned. They had traveled less than a mile when the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Thomas urged the horses faster, but the wagon was no match for mounted pursuers. "Get down!" Thomas shouted, reaching for his rifle. Elizabeth pulled Mrs. Abernathy to the floor of the wagon as gunshots split the night. Thomas returned fire, but he was one boy against unseen assailants. A bullet struck him in the shoulder, spinning him backward off the driver's seat. The horses, panicked by the gunfire, veered off the road. The wagon hit a rock, tilting precariously before overturning. Elizabeth felt herself flying through the air, then the impact of hard ground knocked the breath from her lungs. Disoriented, she crawled toward the overturned wagon. Mrs. Abernathy lay motionless nearby, a dark stain spreading across her grey dress. Thomas was nowhere to be seen. Voices approached, not the guttural sounds of Apache, but Spanish. Mexican bandits, not Indians. Elizabeth reached for her pistol, only to find it gone, lost in the crash. A lantern illuminated the scene, revealing 3 men approaching. Their leader, a heavy-set man with a scar across his cheek, grinned when he spotted her. "Look what we have here," he said in accented English. "The rich gringa from Boston." Elizabeth backed away, searching desperately for a weapon, a hiding place, anything. The man advanced, gesturing for his companions to check the wagon. "Your father owed me money," he continued. "Did you know that? We had an arrangement about cattle crossings that died with him." His grin widened. "But perhaps his daughter can settle his debts in other ways." A scream built in Elizabeth's throat, but before it could escape, another sound cut through the night, a war cry that chilled her blood. The bandits whirled, weapons raised as shadows materialized from the darkness. Arrows whistled through the air, finding their marks with deadly precision. 2 bandits fell immediately. The leader fired wildly into the night before an arrow pierced his throat, silencing him forever. Silence descended, broken only by Elizabeth's ragged breathing. She pressed herself against the overturned wagon, certain she had merely exchanged one death for another. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and familiar. Uncas approached slowly, his bow lowered, but still in hand. "Elizabeth Monroe," he said softly. "Twice now I find you in danger." Relief weakened her knees. "Mrs. Abernathy," she managed to say, "please, help her." Uncas knelt beside the housekeeper, examining her wound with gentle hands. After a moment he looked up, his expression grave. The bullet has found her heart. She walks with the ancestors now. Grief washed over Elizabeth. Mrs. Abernathy had been her one friend in this harsh land, a surrogate mother when she needed one most. "And Thomas?" she asked, dreading the answer. "The boy lives." Uncas gestured toward the darkness, where another Apache warrior supported Thomas's slumped form. "His wound is not fatal, but he needs care." Elizabeth straightened, gathering her composure. "Why are you here? Thomas said a war party was coming." "Not war. Justice." Uncas's expression hardened. 3 days ago, soldiers attacked our camp while the warriors were hunting. They took women and children. We tracked them to a canyon north of here. "That's not possible," Elizabeth protested. "The army wouldn't—" "Not all who wear blue uniforms follow their chief's orders," Uncas cut her off. "Some hunt Apache for bounty, $10 for a scalp." His eyes met hers, challenging her to deny it. Elizabeth had heard whispers of such atrocities, but had dismissed them as exaggerations. The pain in Uncas's eyes told a different story. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." Uncas studied her face as if searching for deception. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "Come," he said finally. "It is not safe here. The noise will attract others." "I can't leave Mrs. Abernathy," Elizabeth protested. "We will honor her properly when there is time." Uncas whistled softly, and a horse emerged from the darkness, her own mare, which must have broken free during the crash. "Can you ride?" Elizabeth nodded, though every muscle ached from the fall. Uncas helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Another warrior brought Thomas, securing him on a second horse. "Where are we going?" Elizabeth asked, as Uncas swung up behind her, his presence warm and solid against her back. "To a place of safety," he answered, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "Trust me, Elizabeth Monroe. Trust an Apache warrior who had twice appeared in the moment of her greatest need." It seemed madness, and yet, as they rode into the night, Elizabeth found herself leaning back against his chest, surrendering to the strange sense of security his presence provided. They traveled through darkness, following trails invisible to her eyes. Uncas guided the horse with minimal direction, his body moving in perfect harmony with the animal. Elizabeth, exhausted by fear and grief, found herself drifting in and out of consciousness, anchored only by the strong arm around her waist. She awoke to the first light of dawn filtering through a narrow canyon. They had stopped beside a small stream, the horses drinking gratefully after the long journey. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep and thirst. "The place between worlds." Uncas dismounted, then reached up to help her down. "My people call it the Shadow Canyon. The white men do not come here." Elizabeth looked around at the towering red walls that seemed to touch the sky. Despite her circumstances, she couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of it, the way the rising sun painted the stone in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas lay nearby, his wound bandaged with strips of cloth. He stirred as she approached, eyes widening with fear when he saw the Apache warriors. "It's all right," Elizabeth assured him, kneeling beside him. "They saved us." "Mrs. Abernathy?" he asked weakly. Elizabeth shook her head, unable to speak the words. Thomas closed his eyes, grief etching lines in his young face. Uncas approached, carrying a water skin. "Drink," he instructed, offering it to Thomas first, then to Elizabeth. "We will rest here until nightfall. Then we must move again." "Move where?" Elizabeth asked. "I need to return to town to tell the sheriff what happened." "The men who attacked you were not acting alone," Uncas said, his voice low. "Someone sent them to find you on that road." "That's absurd. Who would want to harm me?" Uncas crouched beside her, his dark eyes intent. "The same one who seeks to blame Apache's for every death in the territory. The same one who leads soldiers to attack our women and children." "Captain Richardson?" Elizabeth whispered, remembering the captain's keen interest in her ranch. Uncas nodded. "His father was a fair man, but the son, he hunts my people like animals. And now he hunts you." "But why?" "I've done nothing to him." "Your land." Uncas gestured toward the distant mountains. "The stream that runs through your ranch comes from a sacred spring in Apache territory. Richardson believes there is gold there. He has been trying to provoke war so the army will drive us from our land." Elizabeth's mind reeled. Could it be true? She remembered Captain Richardson's insistence on stationing men at her ranch, his detailed knowledge of Uncas. "If what you say is true," she said slowly, "then I'm in as much danger in town as I am here." "More," Uncas agreed. "Here, you are under my protection." The possessive note in his voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. Elizabeth looked away, disturbed by her own reaction. "I need to send word to Sheriff Callaway," she said. "He should know what happened. The boy can carry your message when he is stronger." Uncas stood, offering his hand. "Come. You should rest while you can." He led her to a small cave in the canyon wall, where furs had been laid out to form a simple bed. Outside, other warriors made camp, their movements efficient and nearly silent. "This is your home?" Elizabeth asked, taking in the sparse furnishings. A few clay pots, some tools, weapons carefully arranged against the wall. "One of them." Uncas gestured for her to sit. "I move between worlds, Elizabeth Monroe. Like you." She settled onto the furs, grateful to rest her aching body. "I don't understand. You were born to one life, but thrust into another." He sat across from her, cross-legged on the hard-packed earth. "So was I." "Tell me," she said, suddenly curious about this man who defied everything she had been told about the Apache. Uncas was silent for a long moment, his gaze turned inward. "My mother was Chiricahua Apache," he began. "My father, a scout for the army. They lived in peace until raiders attacked our camp. My mother hid me in a basket among the rocks. A missionary found me, took me to his school." "That's how you learned English," Elizabeth realized. He nodded. "I learned many things, your language, your books, your God, but I never forgot the ways of my mother's people. When I was 16, I returned to them. Weren't they angry that you had lived among white people?" "Some were. Others saw value in one who could walk in both worlds." A shadow crossed his face. "But I belong fully to neither. The white man sees only Apache. My people see the mark of the white man's world upon me." The loneliness in his voice resonated with something in Elizabeth's own heart, the sense of being adrift, belonging nowhere. "I understand," she said softly. "Since my father died, I've felt lost. Boston is no longer home, but neither is this place." Uncas studied her face. "Yet you fight to keep your father's land." "It's all I have left of him." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "Foolish, isn't it, to risk so much for dirt and stone?" "Not foolish." Uncas leaned forward, his expression intense. "Sacred. The Apache fight for our land because it holds the bones of our ancestors, the dreams of our children. Your father's spirit dwells in that place now. You honor him by defending it." His words touched something deep within her, a truth she had felt but couldn't articulate. For the first time since arriving in Arizona, Elizabeth felt understood. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes filling with unexpected tears, "for saving my life, for unseeing me." Uncas reached out, catching a tear on his fingertip with a gesture of such tenderness that Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. "Rest now," he said, his voice gentle. "You are safe here." As he moved to leave, Elizabeth caught his wrist. "Stay," she said impulsively. "Please, just until I fall asleep." He hesitated, then settled beside her, his back against the cave wall. Elizabeth lay down on the furs, suddenly aware of his proximity, of the rhythm of his breathing in the quiet cave. "Uncas," she murmured, sleep already pulling at her consciousness. "What does your name mean?" She felt his hand, light as a feather, brush a strand of hair from her face. "One who sees far," he answered. "One who watches." Elizabeth drifted into sleep with his words echoing in her mind, and for the first time since her father's death, she did not dream of blood and fire, but of mountains stretching endlessly beneath an infinite sky. Elizabeth woke to the sound of voices, low, urgent conversations in Apache that she couldn't understand. The cave was empty, Uncas gone. Sunlight slanted through the entrance, suggesting late afternoon. She rose stiffly, every muscle protesting the previous day's ordeal. Her dress was torn and stained with dirt and blood, her hair a tangled mess. Yet somehow these concerns seemed trivial now, part of a world she had left behind. Outside, she found Thomas sitting by a small fire, his arm in a sling fashioned from deerskin. His face brightened when he saw her. "Miss Monroe, thank heavens you're all right." She knelt beside him, examining his bandaged shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Better, ma'am. That fellow Uncas, He put some kind of herb poultice on it. Burns something fierce, but the pain's less than it was. Elizabeth glanced around the camp. Several warriors were gathered at the far end of the canyon, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Uncas stood slightly apart, his posture rigid. "What's happening?" she asked. Thomas shrugged his good shoulder. "Been like that for about an hour. The one they call Black Knife seems mighty upset about something." He lowered his voice. "Miss Monroe, are we prisoners here?" "No," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Uncas saved our lives. He won't harm us." As if summoned by her words, Uncas broke away from the group and approached them. His face was grave, the lines around his mouth deeper than before. "There is news from the settlement," he said without preamble. "The army is saying Apache's attacked your ranch last night, killed your housekeeper. They are forming a war party to hunt us." Elizabeth stood. "That's a lie. It was Mexican bandits. Richardson must know that." "Richardson leads the soldiers," Uncas confirmed. "They will come to these mountains. We must move deeper into Apache territory." "But we need to tell the truth," Elizabeth protested. "Sheriff Callaway will believe me." "Sheriff Callaway is dead." Uncas's words fell like stones between them. "Shot in his office last night. They say it was Apache arrows, but my people were not there." The news hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. Sheriff Callaway, kind, steady Thomas Callaway, who had been her father's friend and her protector, gone. "Richardson," she whispered, the pieces falling into place. "He's eliminating anyone who might stand in his way." Uncas nodded grimly. "The time for words has passed. Now we must survive." "I'll go with you," Thomas spoke up, struggling to his feet, "to tell what I saw. Those weren't Indians that attacked us on the road." "No." Uncas's tone brooked no argument. "You will return to your father. Tell him what happened, but tell no one else until the time is right." "And when will that be?" Elizabeth asked. "When we have proof of Richardson's treachery." Uncas turned to her. "You must decide, Elizabeth Monroe. Come with me into the mountains or return with the boy. But know this, if you go back, Richardson will not let you live to speak the truth. It wasn't really a choice. Return to certain death, or follow this man, this warrior, into the unknown." Yet something deeper than survival pulled her toward him, a recognition that transcended their different worlds. "I'll come with you," she said softly. Relief flickered in Uncas's eyes, there and gone in an instant. He nodded once, then turned to Thomas. "We will take you as far as the North Ridge. From there you can reach the settlement by morning." They departed as dusk fell, traveling single file along narrow trails that wound through the mountains. Elizabeth rode behind Uncas, watching the powerful lines of his back as he led them through darkness. What kind of man was he, this warrior who moved between worlds, who spoke of honor and sacred land in one breath and gave orders to his warriors in the next? They reached the ridge just before midnight. Uncas dismounted, helping Thomas down from his horse. "Follow the star," he instructed, pointing to the night sky. "Keep it over your right shoulder until dawn. You will see the lights of the settlement before the sun rises." Thomas nodded nervously. "What about Miss Monroe?" "I will protect her with my life," Uncas promised. "Now go, quickly." Elizabeth slid down from her horse, embracing Thomas briefly. "Tell your father what you saw, and Thomas, be careful who you trust." They watched until the boy disappeared into the darkness. Then Uncas turned to her. "We must move quickly. Richardson's men will begin searching at dawn." Elizabeth gathered her skirts, preparing to remount. "Where are we going?" "To the place of my ancestors." Uncas's voice softened. "A valley hidden deep in the mountains where the springs run clear, even in the driest season." They rode through the night, climbing higher into the mountains. The other warriors had separated from them, fanning out to watch for pursuers. Now it was just the two of them, moving like shadows through a landscape that seemed more dream than reality beneath the silver light of the moon. Elizabeth found herself studying Uncas as they rode, the straight line of his nose, the high cheekbones that spoke of his heritage, the way his hair, black as a raven's wing, fell past his shoulders. He was unlike any man she had ever known in Boston, where gentlemen wore tailored suits and spoke of business over brandy. Uncas wore his strength without apology, moved with the fluid grace of a predator, yet treated her with a respect that many civilized men lacked. "You're staring," he said without turning, amusement coloring his voice. Heat flooded Elizabeth's cheeks. "I was just wondering about your people." Where we're going. Uncas slowed his horse, allowing her to ride alongside him where the trail widened. It is a sacred place. Few white eyes have seen it. Then why take me there? He was silent for a long moment, his profile stark against the night sky. Because you have honored truth above fear. Because you see with eyes that want to understand. He glanced at her. And because you have nowhere else to go. The blunt honesty of his words should have offended her, but Elizabeth found herself smiling instead. Fair enough. They crested a ridge just as the first light of dawn broke over the eastern horizon. Below them stretched a valley unlike anything Elizabeth had seen in Arizona, a green oasis nestled between towering cliffs, with a ribbon of silver water cutting through its heart. It's beautiful, she breathed. This is Whispered Valley, Uncas said. My mother's people have guarded it for generations. As they descended into the valley, Elizabeth saw dwellings tucked against the cliff walls, some traditional Apache wickiups, others small structures of stone and wood that spoke of more permanent settlement. Children paused in their play to watch them pass. Women looked up from morning tasks with curious expressions. Uncas led her to a dwelling set apart from the others, built into a natural alcove in the cliff face. You will stay here, he said, helping her dismount. It was my mother's home. The interior was simple but comfortable, furs and woven blankets on a raised platform for sleeping, clay pots for cooking and storage, a small fire pit in the center with a smoke hole above. What surprised Elizabeth most were the books, a small shelf of them tucked into a niche in the rock wall. Your books? She asked, running her fingers along the spines. From my time with the missionary. Uncas remained in the doorway, as if reluctant to enter this space with her. Rest. I will send food. Before he could leave, Elizabeth turned to him. Uncas, I have nothing here, no clothes, no feminine necessities. A hint of a smile touched his lips. The women will provide what you need. Ask for Morning Star. She speaks some English. After he left, Elizabeth explored the dwelling more thoroughly. Besides the books, mostly religious texts but also Shakespeare, Dickens, and a well-worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans, she found small treasures that spoke of a life between worlds. A tarnished silver mirror, a china cup with roses painted on its side, an army compass with initials engraved on its case. Morning Star arrived shortly after, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a face mapped with fine lines. She brought clothing, a simple dress of soft deerskin and moccasins, and helped Elizabeth wash away the dirt of travel in a nearby stream screened by willows for privacy. Uncas say you Boston woman, Morning Star said, as she combed the tangles from Elizabeth's long hair. Very far from home. Yes, Elizabeth agreed. Very far. The woman nodded sagely. Uncas also far from home. Always between. Between what? Between worlds. Between Apache ways and white man ways. Morning Star's fingers were gentle on her scalp. Now maybe not so alone. Elizabeth felt a blush rise to her cheeks. We barely know each other. Morning Star chuckled. Eyes speak before mouth. I see how he watches you. How you watch him. Before Elizabeth could form a response, another woman called from beyond the willows. Morning Star answered in Apache, then turned back to Elizabeth. Come. Council meets. Uncas asks you attend. Elizabeth followed her to the center of the settlement, where a large fire burned. The men of the tribe sat in a circle, their faces solemn in the morning light. Uncas motioned for her to join him. The discussion, conducted primarily in Apache, was passionate but disciplined. Each speaker held a feather while talking, passing it to the next when finished. Elizabeth understood nothing of the words, but recognized the gravity of the situation from their expressions. Finally, Uncas turned to her, switching to English. My people must know what you saw. Tell them about the attack, about Richardson. Elizabeth straightened her spine, suddenly conscious of all the eyes upon her. She described the Mexican bandits who had ambushed them. The leaders claimed that her father owed him money, and Captain Richardson's suspicious behavior in town. He wants my land, she concluded, and he's willing to start a war to get it. An older warrior spoke up in halting English. Why would White Chief kill for your land? Many empty lands for taking. The water, Elizabeth realized aloud. Uncas said the stream that runs through my ranch comes from a sacred spring. Is it here? In this valley? Uncas nodded grimly. The water of life, we call it. It begins in the heart of the mountain and flows through these lands before reaching yours. And Richardson believes there's gold there, Elizabeth continued, pieces falling into place. If he can drive the Apache away and seize my ranch, he controls the water, he finds the gold, he becomes rich man, the elder finished. Old story. White men always hunger for yellow metal. The council debated further, with Uncas translating the key points for Elizabeth. Some warriors advocated for immediate attack on the settlement. Others urged caution, arguing that not all white settlers were enemies. "What do you think we should do?" Uncas asked her when the others had finished speaking. Elizabeth considered carefully. "We need proof of Richardson's crimes, something that will convince the territorial governor to investigate. Without that, it's just my word against a respected army captain's." "And how do we get this proof?" "The bandits," she said decisively. "If we can capture one alive, force him to confess who hired him." "We found their camp yesterday," Uncas informed her. "Empty. They have fled back across the border." Elizabeth's hope faltered, then reformed. "Then we need to find evidence at my ranch. Richardson must have left something. Letters, maps, something to prove his plans." The council nodded in agreement with her logic. It was decided Uncas and 2 trusted warriors would accompany Elizabeth back to her ranch under cover of darkness to search for evidence. As the council dispersed, an elderly woman approached, her face deeply lined with age, her eyes milky with cataracts. She spoke to Uncas in Apache, her gnarled hand reaching out to touch Elizabeth's hair. "My grandmother," Uncas explained softly. "She is very old, has the gift of seeing." The old woman continued speaking, her voice rising and falling like water over stones. When she finished, she patted Elizabeth's cheek and shuffled away. "What did she say?" Elizabeth asked, watching her go. A strange expression crossed Uncas's face, uncertainty perhaps, or wonder. "She said you have fire in your hair and water in your heart, that together we will either save both our peoples or destroy them." He hesitated. "She called you my destiny." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Elizabeth looked away first, her pulse quickening beneath her skin. "I should prepare for tonight," she murmured, retreating to the safety of practicality. Uncas nodded, his expression unreadable once more. "Rest while you can. The journey will be dangerous." Throughout the day, Elizabeth tried to distract herself by learning about the Apache way of life. Morning Star taught her to grind corn for meal, showed her how the women wove baskets so tightly they could hold water. Children, initially shy, gradually approached to touch her red-brown hair in fascination. As evening approached, she returned to Uncas's mother's dwelling to find him waiting, his expression troubled. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Scouts report soldiers in the foothills," he said, "searching the canyons. We must wait another day before attempting to reach your ranch." Elizabeth nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Another day of waiting, another day for Richardson to strengthen his position. "Come," Uncas said suddenly, offering his hand. "There is something I want to show you." Curiosity overcame caution, and Elizabeth placed her hand in his. His skin was warm and calloused, his grip gentle but sure, as he led her along a narrow trail that wound behind the settlement and up into the rocks. They climbed in silence, the only sound their breathing and the occasional call of a bird. The trail grew steeper, requiring Uncas to help her over the more difficult sections, his hands strong at her waist, her own resting on his shoulders. Each touch, brief as it was, sent awareness shimmering through Elizabeth's body. This close, she could smell the scent of him, leather and wood smoke and something indefinably male. His eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that made her breath catch. Finally, they reached a small plateau high above the valley. As they emerged from the trail, Elizabeth gasped. Before them spread a natural pool fed by a waterfall that emerged from the rock face. Steam rose from the surface, misting the air around them. "The sacred spring," Uncas said softly, "the source of the water of life." Elizabeth approached the edge, marveling at the clarity of the water. "It's warm, heated by the earth's fire." Uncas crouched, trailing his fingers through the pool. "And my people believe it has healing powers. Is that why Richardson wants it, for healing?" Uncas's expression darkened. "For profit. There are those who would bottle such water, sell it to rich whites who seek miracle cures." "And the gold?" "A story. A lie to attract investors, perhaps." He straightened. The true treasure is the water itself. They stood in silence, watching the play of evening light on the surface of the pool. The setting sun painted the rocks in shades of amber and rose, turning the mist to gold. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen," Elizabeth said quietly. Uncas studied her face, his gaze intense. "Why did you come to Arizona, Elizabeth Monroe?" "The true reason." The question caught her off guard. "I told you my father died, left me the ranch." "You could have sold it, stayed in Boston among your kind." His voice was gentle but persistent. "Yet you came to a land of strangers and danger. Why?" Elizabeth turned away, her eyes on the distant horizon. "There was nothing left for me in Boston. My father was all I had. After he died," she swallowed hard, "there was a man, a business associate of my father's. He made it clear that I was expected to marry him now that I had no protection." "Did he hurt you?" Uncas's voice had gone dangerously soft. "Not physically, but his intentions were clear in his eyes, in the way he looked at me." She wrapped her arms around herself, the memory still raw. "I couldn't bear it, being passed from one man's ownership to another's without any say in my own life. So when I learned about the ranch, I saw it as escape, a chance to determine my own fate." Uncas moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "And now? What fate do you choose now?" Elizabeth turned to face him, struck anew by the nobility of his features, the depth in his dark eyes. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything has changed so quickly. A week ago I thought all Apache were savages to be feared. Now, he prompted when she fell silent. "Now I'm not sure of anything except that I want the truth to be known. I want justice for your people and for mine." Uncas reached out slowly, as if giving her time to retreat, and touched her cheek. His fingertips were calloused, but his touch exquisitely gentle. "You have a warrior's heart, Elizabeth Monroe." The compliment, so different from anything she had heard in Boston society, warmed her more than his touch. There, women were praised for beauty, for docility, for social graces, never for courage. "Thank you," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities. Then Uncas stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should return before dark," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." As they descended the trail, Elizabeth found herself hyper-aware of his presence behind her. Of each place his hand steadied her on the steeper sections. Something had shifted between them, a recognition neither could deny, yet neither was ready to name. That night, alone in his mother's dwelling, Elizabeth dreamed of the sacred spring, of Uncas's hands on her skin, of water and fire meeting in a cloud of steam that rose toward an endless sky. She woke breathless, her heart racing, the memory of his touch lingering like a promise. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern ridges. A new day, a day that would take her back to her ranch, back to the world of settlers and soldiers, back to danger, but no longer alone. The plan was simple in theory: return to the ranch under cover of darkness, search for evidence of Richardson's schemes, then escape back to the Apache stronghold before dawn. In practice, Elizabeth knew 1,000 things could go wrong. They departed at sunset, riding single file down hidden trails that wound through the mountains. Uncas led the way, with Elizabeth behind him, and 2 warriors, Black Knife and Running Fox, bringing up the rear. No one spoke, even the horses seemed to understand the need for silence. Elizabeth wore the clothing Morning Star had provided, a deerskin dress and moccasins that allowed her to move silently, her hair braided and tucked beneath a cloth to darken its telltale color. Around her waist hung a knife in a beaded sheath, a gift from the old woman who had called her Uncas's destiny. "For protection," the grandmother had said through Uncas's translation, "and for courage." The weight of it against her hip was strangely comforting. They reached the ridge overlooking her ranch well after midnight. Uncas raised a hand, signaling for them to halt, then motioned for Elizabeth to join him at the edge. Below, her ranch lay bathed in moonlight, the main house dark and still, the barn door hanging open, cattle moving restlessly in their pen. But what caught her attention was the tent pitched near the corral and the 2 men sitting beside a small fire. "Soldiers," Uncas whispered. "Richardson has left guards." Elizabeth's heart sank. "We'll never get inside without being seen." Uncas studied the scene, his expression calculating. There is a way. He turned to Black Knife, speaking rapidly in Apache. The warrior nodded, then slipped away into the darkness with Running Fox. What are they doing? Elizabeth asked. Creating a distraction. Uncas helped her dismount, tethering their horses to a scrub oak. When the soldiers investigate, we enter the house. They waited in tense silence, watching the guards below. One dozed by the fire while the other paced, rifle in hand. Minutes stretched like hours, until suddenly the sound of cattle bellowing broke the quiet night. The guards leapt to attention as the herd began to move, pushed by unseen forces toward the broken section of fence on the far side of the property. Now, Uncas said, taking her hand. They descended the ridge quickly, using the shadows for cover. As the guards ran toward the escaping cattle, Uncas and Elizabeth darted across the yard to the back door of the ranch house. The door was locked, but Uncas made short work of it with a knife blade. They slipped inside, into the kitchen, where Elizabeth had taken so many meals with Mrs. Abernathy. The memory of the housekeeper brought a lump to her throat. Where would Richardson hide documents? Uncas asked, his voice barely audible. Elizabeth thought quickly. My father's study, this way. She led him through the darkened house, every creak of the floorboard sending her heart racing. The study door was ajar, evidence someone had been there in her absence. Inside, her father's desk had been ransacked, drawers left open, papers scattered. Someone's been searching, she whispered. Richardson? Uncas nodded grimly. Looking for the same thing we seek, perhaps. They began their own search, methodical despite the urgency. Elizabeth checked the hiding places she knew. The false bottom of the desk drawer, the hollow space behind the bookshelf, the compartment beneath the floorboard where her father had kept emergency funds. Nothing. If Richardson found what he was looking for, we have no proof, she said, despair creeping into her voice. Uncas continued examining the room, his movements precise and focused. He ran his hands along the edges of picture frames, checked beneath the rug, tapped the walls for hollow spaces. Your father, he said suddenly. Where did he keep his most important papers? Elizabeth frowned, thinking. He had a strongbox, but it's not here. He must have taken it to town for safekeeping before he died. With whom? I don't know. The bank, perhaps, or... A memory surfaced, her father mentioning documents left with his friend for safekeeping. Sheriff Callaway. He was executor of my father's will. He might have had the strongbox. And now Callaway is dead, Uncas said grimly. The circle closes. A noise from outside interrupted them, voices approaching the house. The guards had returned sooner than expected. We must go, Uncas urged, taking her arm. They crept back through the house, but before they could reach the kitchen, the front door opened. They pressed themselves into the shadows of the parlor as footsteps entered the hallway. Check upstairs, ordered a familiar voice. I want this place secured before dawn. Captain Richardson. Elizabeth felt Uncas tense beside her, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. She touched his arm, a silent plea not to risk confrontation. They were outnumbered, outgunned. The back door was no longer an option. They could hear soldiers in the kitchen. The only way out was through the parlor window. Elizabeth pointed, and Uncas nodded in understanding. They waited until the footsteps on the stairs faded, then crossed the parlor in silence. Uncas eased the window open, checking outside for guards before helping Elizabeth through. They had just reached the shadow of the barn when a shout went up from the house. The window! Someone's been inside! Run! Uncas commanded, pushing her toward the ridge where their horses waited. They sprinted across the open ground, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, lanterns bobbed as soldiers poured from the house. A rifle shot cracked the night, the bullet kicking up dust at their feet. They reached the base of the ridge, scrambling up the steep incline as more shots rang out. Elizabeth's lungs burned, her legs trembling with effort, but fear drove her onward. Uncas stayed beside her, occasionally taking her arm to help her over rougher ground. They were halfway up when Elizabeth heard Uncas's sharp intake of breath, felt him stumble. She turned in time to see him press a hand to his side, his fingers coming away dark with blood. You're hit, she gasped. Keep moving, he ordered through gritted teeth. Almost there. Elizabeth slipped her arm around his waist, supporting him as they continued upward. Behind them, the soldiers had reached the base of the ridge, their shouts echoing in the night. Black Knife and Running Fox appeared at the top, arrows nocked and ready. They provided covering fire as Elizabeth and Uncas reached the horses. Uncas swung into the saddle despite his injury, reaching down to pull Elizabeth up behind him. They rode hard through the darkness, taking hidden trails too narrow for the soldiers to follow on horseback. Uncas never faltered, though Elizabeth could feel the tension in his body, the warm wetness of blood spreading through his shirt. "Hold on," she whispered against his ear. "Please, just hold on." It was nearly dawn when they reached the hidden valley. Uncas slid from the horse, his face ashen in the growing light. Elizabeth caught him as he staggered, her arms going around his waist. "I need help," she called as they entered the settlement. "He's been shot." Women emerged from dwellings, rushing to assist. They led Uncas to a larger structure, a healing lodge, Elizabeth realized, laying him on a bed of furs. The old grandmother appeared, her gnarled hands already preparing herbs and poultices. "Out," she commanded in English, shooing the other women away. "You stay," she added, pointing to Elizabeth. "Help." Under the grandmother's direction, Elizabeth helped remove Uncas's bloodied shirt. The bullet had grazed his side, leaving a deep furrow through flesh, but miraculously missing vital organs. Still, he had lost blood, and the wound was angry and red. The old woman packed it with a mixture of herbs that smelled of sage and pine, binding it with strips of clean cloth. Throughout the process, Uncas remained conscious but silent, his dark eyes fixed on Elizabeth's face, as if drawing strength from her presence. When they had finished, the grandmother nodded in satisfaction. "He live," she pronounced. "Strong like mountain." She patted Elizabeth's hand. "You stay. Watch." Left alone with Uncas, Elizabeth sat beside him, her hand finding his. "Oh, you shouldn't have risked yourself," she chided softly. His fingers tightened around hers. "My choice," he murmured. "Always my choice." Elizabeth studied his face, the strong lines relaxed now in exhaustion, the dark lashes resting against his cheeks. How had this man, this warrior she had been taught to fear, become so essential to her in such a short time? "Rest," she urged, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I'll be here when you wake." Uncas's eyes drifted closed, his breathing gradually deepening into sleep. Elizabeth remained at his side, unwilling to break the connection of their joined hands. Outside, the sun rose over the valley, bathing the healing lodge in golden light. Morning Star found her there hours later, still maintaining her vigil. "You need rest too," the woman said gently. "Come, eat. I watch him now." Reluctantly, Elizabeth allowed herself to be led outside. The settlement was bustling with activity, women cooking and weaving, children playing, men repairing weapons and tools. Life continuing, despite the dangers that threatened. Black Knife approached, offering a wooden bowl of stew. He spoke in his limited English. "Uncas is strong warrior. Will heal." "Thank you," Elizabeth said, accepting the food gratefully. "For everything you've done to help us." The warrior studied her with solemn eyes. "Uncas believes in you. So we believe." He hesitated, then added, "Never before has Apache warrior risked life for white woman. He sees something special in you." The simple statement warmed her more than the stew. Elizabeth had been raised to believe the Apache were savages incapable of the finer emotions, yet here she had found honor, loyalty, and a sense of community that rivaled any in Boston society. "I see something special in him too," she admitted quietly. Black Knife nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he already knew. "When he wakes, tell him we found soldier camp, 2 miles south of your ranch. Many men. Richardson is preparing for something," Elizabeth realized aloud. "Gathering forces." "Yes, war comes soon." With that grim pronouncement, Black Knife left her to her thoughts. Elizabeth returned to the healing lodge after eating, resuming her place at Uncas's side. He slept deeply, his body fighting to heal. She found herself studying the contours of his face, the straight nose, the high cheekbones, the firm line of his jaw. A face that had become dear to her in ways she had never expected. What future could there be for them? An Apache warrior and a Boston lady. Their worlds could not be more different. Yet in this moment, watching over him as he slept, those differences seemed insignificant compared to the connection that had formed between them. Evening was approaching when Uncas finally stirred. His eyes opened, finding hers immediately. "Elizabeth," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "You're still here." "I promised I would be." She helped him sit up, offering water from a clay cup. "How do you feel?" "I have known worse." He winced as he shifted position. "Did everyone return safely?" "Yes. Black Knife said to tell you they found a soldier camp near my ranch. He says war is coming." Uncas's expression darkened. "Richardson moves faster than I expected. We must act soon." "You're in no condition to fight," Elizabeth protested. "Not fight, think." He took her hand, his gaze intense. "We failed to find evidence at your ranch, but there may be another way." "What do you mean?" "The strongbox. If your father left documents with Sheriff Callaway, they may still be in his office." Elizabeth's pulse quickened. "In town? That's too dangerous." "More dangerous to wait." Uncas struggled to rise. "Richardson prepares for war. Once the first shot is fired, truth will not matter anymore." "Then I'll go," Elizabeth decided. "I can reach town more easily than you. No one is looking for me. They think I'm dead or captured." "No." Uncas's refusal was immediate. "Too risky." "It's our only choice." She met his gaze steadily. "You're injured. The Apache would be shot on sight. But I can walk into town unchallenged." He studied her face, conflict evident in his eyes. "And if Richardson is there?" "I'll be careful." "Go at night when the streets are empty." She squeezed his hand. "Trust me, Uncas, as I have trusted you." The struggle played across his features, the warrior's instinct to protect warring with the leader's recognition of necessity. Finally, he nodded. "Not alone," he insisted. "Black Knife and Running Fox will guide you to the edge of town. Watch from the shadows." Elizabeth agreed to the compromise. They spent the next hours planning the best route into town, the location of the sheriff's office, where to look for the strongbox. When night fell, Elizabeth changed back into her torn and dirty traveling dress, knowing it would raise fewer questions than Apache clothing if she were seen. As she prepared to leave, Uncas called her back to his side. From around his neck he removed a small leather pouch suspended on a cord. "Take this," he said, placing it in her palm. "For protection." Elizabeth examined it curiously. "What is it?" "Medicine bundle, sacred stones, herbs, a feather from an eagle that saved my life when I was a boy." He closed her fingers around it. "My grandmother made it when I returned to my people. She says it holds the power of earth and sky." The gift moved her deeply. "I can't take this," she protested. "It's too precious." "It will return with you." Uncas tied the cord around her neck, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin at her nape. "As you will return to me." The simple statement, spoken with such certainty, made her breath catch. On impulse, Elizabeth leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, gentle kiss. "I will come back," she promised. Uncas's eyes darkened, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Be careful, Elizabeth Monroe. You carry my heart with you now." Words failed her, emotion closing her throat. She nodded once, then rose and left the healing lodge before her resolve could weaken. Black Knife and Running Fox were waiting with the horses. They traveled swiftly through the night, taking hidden trails down from the mountains. Near midnight, they reached the outskirts of Copper Springs. The town was mostly dark, only the saloon showing lights and signs of life. "Wait here," Elizabeth instructed the warriors, dismounting. "If I'm not back by dawn, return to the valley without me." Black Knife nodded grimly. "3 owl calls is warning. Come quickly if you hear." Elizabeth slipped into town, keeping to the shadows. The sheriff's office was dark and locked as expected. She made her way to the back door, relieved to find the window unlatched. Small-town security that now worked in her favor. Inside, the office was much as she remembered it. A desk, filing cabinet, gun rack and cells at the back. But signs of violence remained. A dark stain on the floorboards that could only be blood, papers scattered as if there had been a struggle. Working by moonlight filtering through the windows, Elizabeth searched the office methodically. The sheriff's desk yielded nothing unusual. The filing cabinet contained routine paperwork, wanted posters, arrest records, town ordinances. Where would Callaway have kept a strongbox entrusted to him by a friend? She was about to give up when she noticed something odd about the gun rack. One section of the wall behind it seemed newer than the rest. Moving the rack aside, she found a small door built into the wall, secured with a padlock. The key would be hidden somewhere in the office. Elizabeth searched again, this time looking for hiding places. Under the desk blotter, in the empty coffee pot, behind picture frames. Nothing. Then she remembered something her father once said about Thomas Callaway. That man keeps his most important possession on his person at all times, his father's watch. The sheriff's personal effects would have been collected after his death. Where would they be kept? Elizabeth checked the desk drawers again and found a small box in the bottom drawer. Inside were Callaway's pocket watch, a folded handkerchief, and a small brass key. Heart-pounding, she tried the key in the padlock. It turned smoothly, the lock falling open in her hand. Inside the wall safe was exactly what she sought, a metal strongbox with E. Monroe engraved on the lid. Elizabeth lifted it out with trembling hands. It wasn't locked, her father having apparently trusted Callaway completely. Inside were land deeds, including one for her ranch, letters, and a leather-bound journal. The journal proved to be her father's, its pages filled with his familiar handwriting. Elizabeth flipped through it quickly, stopping when she saw Richardson's name. Her father had been documenting the captain's activities for months before his death. Suspicious meetings with Mexican nationals, rumors of private deals with mining interests, threats against Apache settlements. Most damning was a letter tucked between the journal's pages, from Richardson to Edward Monroe, proposing a partnership to exploit gold supposedly found in the stream running through Monroe's property, with a plan to drive the Apache from their ancestral lands to gain access to the source. Her father's response, drafted but perhaps never sent, was a firm refusal and a warning that he would report Richardson's plans to the territorial governor. "That's why he died," Elizabeth whispered to the empty office. Her father's sudden illness diagnosed as heart failure. Had it been something more sinister? A noise from outside interrupted her thoughts. Boots on the boardwalk, approaching the office. Elizabeth quickly replaced the strongbox, keeping only the journal and letters, which she tucked into her dress. The front door rattled as someone tried the handle. Then a key turned in the lock. Elizabeth darted into the shadows of the cells at the back just as the door opened. Captain Richardson entered, followed by another soldier carrying a lantern. They moved to the desk, Richardson rifling through the drawers with growing frustration. "It has to be here somewhere," he muttered. Callaway was his executor. "Maybe it was never here, sir," the soldier suggested. "Or maybe someone already found it." "Impossible. No one knew about—" Richardson broke off, noticing the displaced gun rack and open wall safe. "Blast it, someone's been here." Elizabeth pressed herself against the cell wall, praying the shadows would conceal her. Her hand found Uncas's medicine bundle, clutching it like a lifeline. Richardson stalked to the safe, his curse echoing in the small office when he found it empty. "Search the place," he ordered. "Whoever took it can't have gone far." The soldier began methodically checking the office, moving toward the cells. Elizabeth looked desperately for an escape route. The back window was too far. She'd never reach it before being seen. Suddenly, an owl's call sounded from outside, 3 times in quick succession. The warning signal. Both men froze. "What was that?" the soldier asked. Richardson drew his pistol. "Check outside." The moment the soldier opened the door, an arrow whistled through the air, striking him in the shoulder. He fell back with a cry of pain. Richardson fired blindly into the darkness, shouting for reinforcements. Elizabeth seized her chance, darting from her hiding place toward the back window. Richardson whirled at the movement, his gun tracking her. "You!" he snarled, recognition dawning. "Should have known you'd survive, Miss Monroe." "It's over, Richardson," she said, backing toward the window. "I have my father's journal. I know what you did." His face contorted with rage. "Your father was a fool who couldn't see opportunity when it was right in front of him, and now his daughter will die for his stubbornness." He raised his pistol, taking deliberate aim. Elizabeth braced herself for the shot, but it never came. Instead, a dark form crashed through the window behind Richardson, tackling him to the ground. Uncas. The 2 men grappled on the floor, Richardson's gun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. Elizabeth stood frozen for an instant, then rushed to help. She grabbed a heavy wooden chair, bringing it down on Richardson's head with all her strength. The captain went limp. "Uncas!" she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "You're supposed to be resting. Your wound." "I could not let you face danger alone." He winced as he sat up, fresh blood staining the bandage at his side. "You have the proof?" Elizabeth patted the journal hidden in her dress. Yes. Everything we need. Shouts in the street indicated that Richardson's men had been alerted by the gunshot. Uncas pulled himself to his feet, grimacing with pain. We must go, now. They escaped through the back window, finding Black Knife waiting with the horses. Running Fox lay on the ground, an army bullet in his leg. Help me with him, Uncas ordered, lifting his wounded warrior onto a horse. Elizabeth mounted behind Running Fox to steady him, while Uncas and Black Knife took the remaining horses. They fled town, riding hard despite their injuries. Behind them they could hear the sounds of pursuit, hoofbeats and shouted orders as Richardson's men organized a chase. "They're gaining," Elizabeth called as they thundered through the darkness. Uncas glanced back, his expression grim. "There is another way, through Devil's Canyon." "The rockslide blocked that pass," Black Knife objected. "Not entirely. There is a narrow path, risky but passable." Elizabeth remembered hearing about Devil's Canyon, a treacherous ravine where a rockslide had killed several travelers the previous year. No one used that route anymore. "Do it," she urged. "It's our only chance." Uncas led them toward the canyon, the sound of pursuit growing fainter as they veered from the main trail. The entrance to the ravine was nearly invisible in the darkness, a narrow gap between towering rock walls. "Single file," Uncas instructed. "Stay close to the right wall." They proceeded slowly, the path barely wide enough for the horses. To their left, a sheer drop fell away into blackness. Loose stones skittered beneath the horses' hooves, disappearing into the void. Elizabeth kept her eyes fixed on Uncas's back, trying not to think about the precipice beside them. They had traveled perhaps half the length of the canyon when Running Fox's horse stumbled, dislodging a cascade of rocks. The noise echoed through the ravine like thunder. "They'll hear that," Elizabeth whispered. Sure enough, moments later they heard voices at the canyon entrance. Their pursuers had found their trail. "Keep moving," Uncas ordered. "The path widens ahead." They pushed forward, the horses picking their way carefully through the darkness. Behind them, shots rang out, bullets ricocheting off the canyon walls. Elizabeth hunched lower over Running Fox, trying to make herself a smaller target. Finally, they reached the end of the narrow section. The path widened into a small plateau, offering momentary respite. Uncas dismounted, examining the canyon walls with quick, knowing eyes. "We can bring it down," he said to Black Knife. "Seal the path behind us." Black Knife nodded in understanding. The two warriors worked rapidly, positioning themselves on either side of the canyon where the rock wall showed signs of instability. Using their knives as levers, they began to pry at key support stones. "When it starts to fall, ride," Uncas instructed Elizabeth. "Don't look back." The pursuing soldiers had reached the narrow section of path, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the darkness. A few more minutes, and they would break through to the plateau. With a grinding sound, the first rocks began to shift. Uncas and Black Knife leapt onto their horses as the canyon wall started to collapse. The group galloped forward as tons of rock crashed down behind them, filling the air with dust and the deafening roar of nature's fury. When they finally slowed, looking back, they saw that their plan had worked. The path was completely blocked, a mountain of rubble separating them from their pursuers. "We've bought time," Uncas said, "but Richardson won't give up. He'll find another way around." "Then we need to reach the territorial governor before he does," Elizabeth replied, patting the journal hidden against her heart. "We have the proof now." Uncas nodded, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. "Tucson. The governor has an office there." "That's 3 days' ride," Black Knife pointed out. "Running Fox needs healing, you too, brother." "We'll separate," Uncas decided. "You take Running Fox back to the valley. Elizabeth and I will continue to Tucson." Black Knife looked as if he wanted to object, but finally nodded. "May the spirits watch over you." After helping Running Fox onto Black Knife's horse, they parted ways, the warriors heading back into the mountains, Elizabeth and Uncas turning south toward the territorial capital. They rode through the remainder of the night, speaking little. Elizabeth could see that Uncas was suffering, though he made no complaint. The wound in his side had reopened, blood seeping through his bandages. As dawn broke, they stopped beside a small stream to rest the horses and tend to Uncas's injury. Elizabeth helped him dismount, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin. "You're burning with fever," she said, helping him sit beneath the shade of a cottonwood. She soaked her handkerchief in the cool stream water, pressing it to his forehead. Uncas caught her wrist, his eyes fever-bright but lucid. "The journal," he said. "Show me what you found." Elizabeth retrieved the journal and letters from her dress, spreading them on the ground between them. Together they read Edward Monroe's careful documentation of Richardson's schemes, the false gold claims meant to attract investors, the plan to divert the sacred spring for profit, the arrangement with Mexican bandits to intimidate settlers who refused to sell their land. Most damning was her father's final entry, dated just 2 days before his death. Richardson visited today. When I refused his offer again and threatened to expose him, I saw murder in his eyes. If anything happens to me, this journal should serve as testament to his guilt. "He did kill my father," Elizabeth whispered, grief and rage mingling in her heart. Uncas took her hand, his touch gentle despite his fever. "And now we will bring him to justice. For your father, for Sheriff Callaway, for my people." They rested for several hours, allowing Uncas to sleep while Elizabeth kept watch. When he woke, his fever had lessened slightly, though he was still weak. "We should continue," he insisted, struggling to his feet. "Richardson will have men watching all roads to Tucson." "You're in no condition to ride," Elizabeth protested. "I have endured worse." He managed a faint smile. "Besides, I promised to protect you. I cannot do that if we separate." They mounted and continued south, keeping to less traveled trails where possible. The day grew brutally hot, the sun beating down on them mercilessly. Elizabeth shared her canteen with Uncas, noting with concern how little he drank, saving water for her despite his fever. By nightfall, they had covered perhaps half the distance to Tucson. They made camp in a sheltered arroyo, building only the smallest of fires for warmth. Uncas's condition had worsened throughout the day, his breathing labored, his skin alternating between burning hot and frighteningly cold. Elizabeth tended him through the night, bathing his face with cool water, forcing him to drink, changing his bandages. The wound was angry and inflamed, infection setting in despite the herbs the old grandmother had packed into it. "You need a doctor," she told him as dawn approached. "No doctors between here and Tucson," he said weakly. "We continue." "You'll die if we continue," she argued, tears stinging her eyes. Uncas reached up to touch her face, his fingers tracing the track of a tear down her cheek. "Then I die completing my purpose, protecting you, saving my people." "I won't let you die," Elizabeth vowed, capturing his hand against her face. "Do you hear me, Uncas? I forbid it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "So commanding, Elizabeth Monroe. Is this how Boston ladies speak to warriors?" "This is how a woman speaks to the man she loves," she answered fiercely, the words escaping before she could consider their implications. Uncas went very still, his dark eyes searching hers. "You love me," Elizabeth hadn't planned to declare herself, certainly not here, not while he lay injured and fevered. But now that the words had been spoken, she wouldn't take them back. "Yes," she said simply, "I love you. So you must live, do you understand? Live so that we can find out what that means. An Apache warrior and a Boston lady loving each other in this impossible world." He pulled her down to him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words. Despite his weakness, there was nothing hesitant in the way he claimed her mouth, nothing uncertain in the hands that tangled in her hair. When they finally parted, breathless, he whispered against her lips, "For you, Elizabeth Monroe, I will live." They broke camp at first light, Uncas insisting he was strong enough to continue, despite evidence to the contrary. Elizabeth rode behind him, her arms around his waist to support him as they traveled. By midday, they spotted riders on the horizon, a patrol of soldiers heading north on the main road to Tucson. Elizabeth guided their horses into a ravine, hiding until the danger passed. "Richardson will have men watching all approaches to the governor's office," Uncas said when the patrol had gone. "We need a different strategy." "What if we don't go to the governor?" Elizabeth suggested. "What if we send the evidence instead?" "With whom? We can trust no one." Elizabeth thought for a moment. "Thomas Jenkins. His father's stagecoach line runs to Tucson. If we can get word to him—" "Too risky," Uncas objected. "The boy is brave but young. If Richardson's men catch him—" "Then we need a diversion," Elizabeth decided. "Something to draw Richardson's attention while we slip into town." Despite his fever, Uncas's tactical mind remained sharp. "Fire," he said after a moment's consideration. "Richardson's men have a camp south of your ranch. If it burned, they would rush to defend it, leaving the road to Tucson open. Elizabeth nodded. But who would set such a fire? You're in no condition, and I can't do it alone. My people will help. Uncas straightened in the saddle, drawing on reserves of strength Elizabeth hadn't known he possessed. There is an Apache camp half a day's ride from here. We can reach it by nightfall. They altered course, heading southeast toward the foothills, where Uncas said they would find allies. As the sun began to set, Elizabeth spotted smoke from cook fires rising above a cluster of wickiups nestled in a protected valley. The camp's sentries challenged them, but upon recognizing Uncas, quickly ushered them inside. The tribal leader, a gray-haired man with a face weathered like ancient leather, listened gravely as Uncas explained their situation in Apache. He will help, Uncas translated for Elizabeth. His warriors will create the diversion we need, and his healer will tend my wound. That night, Elizabeth watched anxiously as the tribe's medicine man cleaned and treated Uncas's injury, chanting softly as he worked. The healer applied a poultice of unfamiliar herbs, binding the wound with fresh bandages. By morning, Uncas's fever had broken, and though still weak, he seemed markedly improved. Apache medicine is powerful, he told Elizabeth with a tired smile, especially when one has reason to heal quickly. His eyes held hers, the memory of her declaration of love hanging between them. Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks, but didn't look away. She had meant every word. They departed at noon, accompanied by 4 Apache warriors who would set the diversionary fire. The plan was simple. At midnight, the warriors would attack Richardson's supply camp, setting fire to wagons and tents. When his men rushed to defend it, Elizabeth and Uncas would make their dash for Tucson. As darkness fell, they took up position on a ridge overlooking the supply camp. Below, soldiers moved about their evening routines, unsuspecting of the chaos to come. When the attack begins, ride hard, and don't stop until you reach the governor's office, Uncas instructed. I'll be right behind you. Elizabeth shook her head firmly. We ride together or not at all. I won't leave you behind. Before Uncas could argue, the night erupted into action. The Apache warriors descended on the camp like shadows, setting fire to tents and wagons, their war cries splitting the darkness. Soldiers scrambled for weapons, shouting in confusion. Now, Uncas urged, and they mounted, spurring their horses down the backside of the ridge and onto the road to Tucson. They rode hard through the night, the glow of the burning camp fading behind them. By dawn, the adobe buildings of Tucson appeared on the horizon, the territorial capital bathed in golden morning light. They slowed to a walk as they entered the town, trying not to attract attention. Uncas had concealed his Apache clothing beneath a soldier's coat, taken during their escape from Copper Springs, but his heritage was still evident in his features, his long hair hastily tied back. The governor's office was a modest building on the main street, the territorial flag hanging limply in the still morning air. As they approached, Elizabeth scanned the street for signs of Richardson's men, but saw none. It worked, she breathed. They're all at the camp. They dismounted, Uncas wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wound. Elizabeth kept the precious journal and letters clutched tightly in her hand as they climbed the steps to the office door. Inside, a clerk looked up in surprise at their disheveled appearance. May I help you? We need to see Governor Safford immediately, Elizabeth said firmly. It's a matter of life and death. The governor is in a meeting. Tell him Elizabeth Monroe has evidence of Captain James Richardson's crimes against settlers and Apache alike, she interrupted. Tell him innocent people will die if he doesn't see us now. The clerk hesitated, then nodded and disappeared through a door at the back of the office. Moments later, he returned. The governor will see you, he said, ushering them into a spacious office where a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard rose from behind a large desk. Miss Monroe, I presume, Governor Safford said, his sharp eyes taking in their appearance. And your companion? This is Uncas, Elizabeth replied, lifting her chin. A leader among the Chiricahua Apache and my... She hesitated, then continued with certainty. My betrothed. If the governor was shocked by this declaration, he hid it well. I understand you have evidence regarding Captain Richardson. Elizabeth placed the journal and letters on his desk. My father documented everything before his death, which I now believe was murder. Richardson has been provoking conflict with the Apache to drive them from their land. He's responsible for the death of Sheriff Callaway, and countless others. All for profit. Governor Safford examined the documents carefully, his expression growing graver with each page he turned. When he reached the final entry in Edward Monroe's journal, he looked up, his decision apparently made. "This is indeed disturbing evidence," he said. "If proven true, Captain Richardson will face severe consequences." He moved to his door, issuing instructions to the clerk outside. "I'm dispatching men to arrest Richardson immediately. In the meantime, you both should remain here where it's safe." "There's more." Uncas spoke for the first time, his voice steady despite his weakened condition. "My people have suffered greatly at Richardson's hands. Any peace between Apache and settler must acknowledge this truth." Governor Safford studied him thoughtfully. "You speak for your tribe." "I speak for those who desire peace," Uncas replied. "For those who believe Apache and white man can share this land, if both respect its sacredness." "An admirable sentiment," the governor said. "Perhaps when this matter with Richardson is settled, we might discuss such a peace." A commotion outside interrupted them, shouts and the sound of running feet. The door burst open to reveal the clerk, his face pale. "Governor, Captain Richardson is approaching with armed men. They are demanding Miss Monroe be turned over to them." Elizabeth moved closer to Uncas, who straightened despite his injury, one hand moving to the knife at his belt. Governor Safford's expression hardened. "It seems the captain has sealed his own fate." He turned to Elizabeth and Uncas. "Wait here, I'll deal with this." Through the window they watched as Safford strode out to meet Richardson, who had dismounted and was advancing toward the office with several soldiers behind him. The captain looked wild-eyed and disheveled, his uniform stained with soot from the campfire. "I demand the immediate surrender of Elizabeth Monroe and the Apache savage accompanying her," Richardson shouted, loud enough to be heard through the glass. "They are wanted for murder and insurrection." "The only one facing charges here is you, Captain," Governor Safford replied calmly. "I have evidence of your crimes against both settlers and Apache. Your military career is over." Richardson's face contorted with rage. "You're a fool, Safford. Those savages have killed dozens of settlers. They're animals who need to be exterminated." "The only animal I see is wearing a uniform," the governor retorted. "Men, arrest Captain Richardson for the murders of Edward Monroe and Sheriff Thomas Callaway." As the territorial marshals moved to take him into custody, Richardson drew his pistol with lightning speed. "I'll see you in hell first." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Richardson fired at the governor, the bullet going wide. Before he could fire again, Uncas burst from the office, tackling the captain to the ground. The two men grappled in the dust, Richardson's gun discharging harmlessly into the air. Elizabeth ran after them, heart in her throat as she saw Richardson draw a knife. "Uncas!" Uncas caught the captain's wrist, stopping the blade inches from his throat. With a powerful twist, he disarmed Richardson, pinning him to the ground as the marshals rushed forward to secure him. "It's over, Richardson," Uncas said, his voice cold with the memory of all the suffering the captain had caused. "Your war ends today." As the marshals dragged Richardson away, still shouting threats and curses, Elizabeth hurried to Uncas's side. He stood unsteadily, the exertion having taken its toll on his healing wound. "You could have been killed," she chided, supporting him with her arm around his waist. "Worth the risk," he replied simply. "To end this, to protect you." Governor Safford approached them, genuine respect in his eyes as he regarded Uncas. "That was a brave act, sir. I am in your debt." "I seek no debt," Uncas answered. "Only justice for my people." "And you shall have it," the governor promised. "Richardson will stand trial for his crimes. And I would be honored if you would participate in peace talks between the territory and the Apache nation." Uncas inclined his head in acceptance. "When I am recovered, I will return to speak for my people. And you, Miss Monroe?" Safford turned to Elizabeth. "What will you do now?" Elizabeth looked up at Uncas, her decision already made. "I'll rebuild my ranch, make it a place where Apache and settler can meet in peace." She took Uncas's hand in hers. "A place where two worlds can become one." The days that followed were a blur of testimonies and official statements. Richardson was imprisoned awaiting trial, his supporters disbanded or arrested as accomplices. Evidence mounted that he had indeed been responsible for Edward Monroe's death, poison administered during a business dinner, designed to mimic heart failure. Governor Safford, true to his word, initiated peace talks with Apache leaders. with Uncas serving as mediator between the cultures. The territorial legislature established protections for Apache sacred lands, including the spring that fed both Whispered Valley and Elizabeth's ranch. As for Elizabeth and Uncas, they returned to her ranch to begin rebuilding what had been damaged during her absence. The locals watched with fascination and often disapproval as the Boston heiress and the Apache warrior worked side by side, creating something new from the ashes of the past. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire, Uncas took Elizabeth's hand in his. "My grandmother's prophecy," he said softly. "Fire in your hair, water in your heart. Together, we would either save our peoples or destroy them." Elizabeth leaned her head against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "I think we've made a good start on saving them." "Indeed." He tilted her face up to his. "But there is one thing still unsettled between us." "Oh?" She raised an eyebrow, heart quickening at his intense gaze. "You called me your betrothed in the governor's office," he reminded her. "Was that merely a strategy, Elizabeth Monroe, or did you mean those words?" Elizabeth smiled, remembering her impulsive declaration. "I meant them. If you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" Uncas laughed, the sound rich and warm in the gathering dusk. "I have loved you since you stood before me at Wallace's cabin, unafraid despite your terror. I have loved you as I have loved no other, across worlds, across the divide between our peoples." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a simple band of silver set with a small turquoise stone. "I had this made in Tucson. It is not a fancy Boston jewel, but it's perfect," Elizabeth interrupted, tears of joy blurring her vision as he slipped it onto her finger. "As perfect as this imperfect life we're creating." Uncas gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all the days to come. As darkness fell around them, the first stars appearing in the vast Arizona sky, Elizabeth knew she had found her true home at last, not in a place, but in the heart of a warrior who had called her name in the night to save her. 5 years later, morning light spilled through the window, rousing Elizabeth from sleep. She reached across the bed, finding only empty space where Uncas should have been. Rising, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch of their expanded ranch house. In the yard below, Uncas was teaching their 4-year-old son, Edward, to ride his pony. The boy sat straight and proud, his features a perfect blend of his parents', his father's dark eyes and high cheekbones, his mother's auburn hair and determined chin. Beyond them stretched the ranch that had become known throughout the territory as Sacred Waters, part working cattle operation, part neutral ground where Apache and settler could trade and talk in peace. The stream that had once been the focus of Richardson's greed now sustained gardens and orchards, its clear water a symbol of the life Elizabeth and Uncas had built together. As if sensing her presence, Uncas looked up, his face softening into the smile he reserved only for her. 5 years of marriage had only deepened the bond between them, each day bringing new challenges and joys as they navigated their unique path. Not everyone had accepted their union. Some settlers still crossed the street when they saw Uncas in town. Some Apaches still regarded Elizabeth with suspicion when she visited the reservation established in Whispered Valley. But for every person who turned away, there were others who recognized the possibility their marriage represented, a future where difference didn't mean division. "Mama, look," Edward called, guiding his pony in a small circle. "I'm riding like Papa." "Beautifully done, my love," she called back, pride warming her heart. Uncas lifted the boy from the saddle, setting him on his shoulders as he walked toward the house. "Someone is eager for breakfast before we leave for the celebration," he said, climbing the steps to join her. Today marked the 5th anniversary of the peace treaty between the territorial government and the Apache Nation, a treaty that had held despite tensions and occasional setbacks. A celebration would be held in Whispered Valley, with Governor Safford himself attending. "Is Morning Star still coming to help with the baby?" Elizabeth asked, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. "She waits by the stream," Uncas confirmed. "She says this one will be a girl with eyes like the sky." Elizabeth smiled, picturing a daughter with Uncas's strength and her own stubbornness. "Your grandmother's gift of seeing seems to have passed to Morning Star." They prepared for the journey to Whispered Valley, loading supplies into the wagon that would follow while they rode ahead on horseback. Edward chattered excitedly about seeing his Apache cousins, switching easily between English and Apache as children do. As they crested the ridge that had once marked the boundary between their worlds, Elizabeth reined in her horse, taking in the view. Below, Whispered Valley bloomed green and vibrant, its people preparing for the celebration. Beyond it rose the mountains that had once seemed so forbidding, but now felt like an extension of home. Uncas brought his horse alongside hers, reaching across to take her hand. "Happy?" he asked simply. Elizabeth met his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same wonder she felt at the life they had created from unlikely beginnings. "Beyond words," she answered truthfully. They rode down into the valley together, their son between them, their future unfolding like the path before them, not without obstacles but rich with possibility. In a land where water meant life and the sun burned away illusions, they had found a truth stronger than prejudice, more enduring than hate. Elizabeth Monroe had once cursed the Apache's name. Now she bore it proudly, alongside her own, a symbol of two worlds that had become one in the sacred waters of love. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We truly hope this story touched your heart as much as it did ours. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Supporting our channel means so much to us and keeps us inspired to create more stories full of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here. Don't forget, at the end of this video, another story from our channel will appear. Click and be surprised by more emotional tales like this one.